The following podcast contains mature language and discussions that are not suitable for younger audiences. The opinions voiced in this podcast are our own. We are not experts on the topic we present, but have conducted our own research. The content in this episode is disturbing in nature and may trigger some listeners. If you are uncomfortable with these types of discussions, then this episode might not be for you. Listener discretion is advised. On May 16th, 2022, the partial remains of a woman were discovered in a garbage bin behind an apartment building in Winnipeg. The resulting investigation pointed towards the work of a serial killer, and as time went on, more people would be linked to this case. As of now, in 2025, 4 Indigenous women have been officially identified as victims. However, finding these women's bodies was a different story, and one that was compounded heavily by politics. The investigation into finding some of the missing women was stalled and resisted. But why? In this episode, we're going to discuss the timeline of the murders, who committed these crimes, and why recovering the bodies was delayed and even disregarded by both police and the provincial government. Welcome to the Strange and Undecided podcast. Welcome back to the Strange and Undecided podcast. I'm your producer and host, Jarrett, joined by my co-hosts,
Patrick
and Brandon.
Welcome back, guys. So today we have an episode that we're going to cover that is fairly recent, and we haven't really covered one this recent in history and one that's actually still ongoing. So this case tonight was recommended by Pat, actually. So how did you come across this?
at the gym running on the treadmill, just watching the TVs. And I just see like a headline, at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. It's kind of like breaking news.
Yeah, it just repeats. And I saw something about that and I just texted you right away.
Yeah, that was 2-3 weeks ago?
Yeah, with all my typos because I was running on the treadmill.
So yeah, Brando, have you heard about this case or anything kind of surrounding this case before?
I haven't, but with my brother being an RCMP in the Winnipeg area, I'm very excited about this one.
All right. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. On Monday, May 16th, 2022, police received a call about something terrifying found inside a garbage can behind Marjoy Apartments in North Kildonan, Winnipeg. The person that called the police said that they were looking for scrap metal in garbage bins and found what appeared to be partial human remains. They chillingly stated, quote, "She's obviously been murdered," end quote. Police arrived at the apartment building and secured the crime scene. Upon inspection of the garbage bin, they confirmed that there in fact were human remains inside belonging to a woman. They described it as a horrifically grisly scene, but did not comment on where they believed the individual was killed. What was even more disturbing was that the remains were not complete. This led to the theory that some of the victims' remains may have been dumped at Brady Road landfill during a weekly garbage pickup, and police would shift their focus to a search that involved a massive area of the landfill in the coming days. Poor weather conditions and extensive preparation delayed the search, however. Before that, on May 17th, only one day after the discovery of the woman's remains, police arrested an individual in connection to the crime. Jeremy Anthony Michael Skibicki, who was 35 at the time, was arrested on Henderson Highway. Initially, when I was researching this case, I found this to be exceptionally quick in finding and arresting someone for murder. It puzzled me so much that I tried to find out what would lead police to this man. So I reached out to Sergeant Jeff, who is a retired police officer with 30 years experience, and several stints of that 30 years was worked in the criminal investigation unit. I asked for his insight on this case, and let's hear what he had to say. So when I first looked into this case and was researching it, I found it hard to comprehend how police arrested the suspect so quickly. It was the day after the remains were found in the garbage bin. Could you explain how this could happen and what would be needed to make an arrest of somebody this quickly?
Well, when they first started looking at the garbage bin, it was in the back of an apartment building. So the first thing you'd look at is video. Is there surveillance video? And from what I understand, the remains were dumped in the wee hours of the morning. So very little pedestrian traffic. So you could probably isolate it down to a certain point where somebody was seen dropping something off into the bin and walking out. Now, when they start to do some checks on that, and they realize maybe canvassing the neighbors, the people in the building, realizing no, he doesn't live here. That right there makes things very suspicious. So when they track that person down, it almost becomes a case of exclusive opportunity. That was the only person who was in at that bin during that time frame to have deposited those bags with the remains in them. He lived in the neighborhood, but decided to go to another building to dispose of the remains. And that in and of itself is suspicious. At the very least, he is responsible for depositing the remains of a human being and is somehow involved in the crime. That would or at least reach the level of proof necessary for an arrest. What people may not realize is that what you need for an arrest compared to laying a charge and also a conviction are three different levels of proof. It's not reasonable in any way, shape, or form to expect a full battery of information, DNA, swabs, confessions, before you can make an arrest. That's actually not a very reasonable thing. Understanding that you need to go up to the next level before the next level can be met. So I have enough grounds to arrest somebody, but if I can't get beyond that burden of proof, then I can't lay a charge. And when a charge is laid, if it doesn't, when the Crown reviews that, they have to come up with an opinion that there is a reasonable expectation of conviction. And that's the next step. But that is all part of the investigation. When our criminal law was designed, they understood the fact that that's the way a crime is going to be investigated, and that's necessary for the proper administration of justice. And that's the way that it is looked. And that's the way it's tested all the way along the way.
So in this case, it wouldn't just be suspicion that they could go off of. They'd have to have more concrete evidence than that, right?
Yeah. Suspicion would make you look at something. Reasonable grounds, that's the term that's used, is for the arrest. And you have to have several things. It's a prima facie case without getting too technical. So if they're going to do a charge of first-degree murder, there's a prima facie case. That's the next burden of proof that has to be met. And that is, you look in the criminal code, and it says what an offense is. It's got a definition of what that particular offense is. You then have to make sure, and it's like a checkbox almost, that you have proven all the aspects of that offense. If that hasn't been done, that charge is quashed right there.
Thank you, Sergeant Jeff, for your expertise and invaluable insights.
Ditto.
Fortunately, after we talked about this, I was able to find out why police went after Skibicki in the first place. Through a transcript of the interview I managed to dig up, they had caught Skibicki on video surveillance behind the apartment where the remains were found, as well as shoe print impressions. Ultimately, like Sergeant Jeff mentioned, to make an arrest, you need reasonable and probable grounds that somebody has committed an offense. Mere suspicion is insufficient. So doing a little background on Skibicki, he was born in Winnipeg and was adopted by a Polish family. His birth mother was originally from Newfoundland and Labrador. He had an extensive history of abusive behavior towards his partners. In 2015, he was convicted for assaulting his pregnant common-law partner. He also strangled her, punched her in the face repeatedly, and threatened to kill her if she called the police. At one point, he tried smothering her with such force that her teeth started to bleed. She filed for a protection order against Skibicki, stating in her application, saying, quote, "He will not stop until I am dead," end quote. The order was dismissed for unknown reasons. However, he was sentenced to 2 months in prison and 2 months of probation for the assault. In 2019, his new wife at the time filed a protection order against him during their first wedding anniversary, citing threats and assault.
How does this guy keep finding partners?
It's a great question, but you will find that out soon of who he picks.
If we're talking about a serial killer, from what we've learned throughout our series, they're probably kind of manipulative and conniving.
Yep, and it's no different in this case. In 2021, he faced charges for disobeying court orders, threatening his wife, and assaulting her with a deadly weapon. Skibicki had told her also that he would abduct her, torture her, traffic her, or kill her. In May of 2022, she filed for divorce. Both partners he had performed these vile acts on were both Indigenous women. This is an important fact, as it would later be found that Skibicki's personal Facebook page was full of anti-Semitic, misogynistic, and white supremacist material. With Skibicki in custody, police interviewed for a total of 20 hours. He was allowed to speak to a lawyer for consultation, but would ultimately confess to police that he was responsible for the death of the individual in the garbage bin. He was even wearing evidence as he walked into the interview room, a watch that had belonged to her. I was able to find some footage of the interview, so let's have a listen.
I really just wanted to see how far, I could take things, because the criminal justice system is a joke. The world that we're living in is sick. I was driven to do stuff like this because I was so spent emotionally. I killed 4 people. Okay. Do you know their names? Yeah. I did this because I believe that there should be capital punishment, and that this is racially motivated, that I felt sickened because I was, told this whole thing about racial purity, the extension of the white race, the great replacement theory, globalism, Bolshevism, efforts to eradicate white people. I don't believe that races are meant to be forced to live together. And this existence that I've had is just completely messed up.
First of all, they conduct their interrogation in a bathroom cubicle.
Yeah, they're not very comfortable rooms, and they're not meant to be. So if you didn't hear that, he confessed to a total of 4 murders, unprovoked by the way, and is also showing very little emotion in doing so. I was able to find the transcript of the interview the police conducted, as I mentioned earlier. I will be posting that in the show notes for those of you who are interested in reading through it. It is 350 pages long. In summary, though, he admitted to killing 4 women: Rebecca Contois, Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, and an unknown individual named Buffalo Woman.
Let me ask you, Brando, what are your first impressions about this guy?
Just seeing that interview, it's just how composed he is, and he's just rhyming off his whole story and just calm as can be, just so full of himself.
I get the vibe that he's quite arrogant. He doesn't really show any remorse, and he's just point blank about what he did.
Yeah, it's very matter of fact with what he's saying. It's no different than if he was explaining what he had for breakfast that day. There's no emotion, no difference in tone, no change in his personality whatsoever. Really disturbing. So the names I mentioned before of the women who he admitted to killing, these names wouldn't be made public at the time, but as the investigation progressed, their identities would be released. On May 19th, 2022, police announced publicly that they had arrested Skibicki and charged him with first-degree murder. On the same day, they also announced who the remains in the garbage bin belonged to: 24-year-old Rebecca Contois of the Crane River First Nation and a mother to 1 child. They also stated openly that more victims could be possible. However, the investigation was still ongoing and there were no concrete facts yet. A chilling statement nonetheless. Police had obtained a search warrant for Skibicki's residence to try and uncover any other evidence and focus their efforts as well on Brady Road landfill, where they believe the rest of Rebecca Contois' remains were. On June 2nd, 2022, a search of the Brady Road landfill commenced, and during the 2-week search, remains would be recovered from the heaps of garbage, confirming their suspicions. They would make an announcement of these findings on June 15th, 2022, and identify those remains as belonging to Rebecca Contois on June 21st.
Do we know about the methodology of how they would go about searching an entire landfill?
So, from my understanding, from what I found, was when waste management and garbage dumps, they go to these places, they dump their garbage in a grid-like pattern. So it's day, month, year, and it's organized in that manner. And as time goes on, they will go over top of that spot, but they should have like a cataloged idea of which days are in which areas, so they can kind of isolate their search to certain days when they believe, in this case, say an individual went missing, and focus on just that area instead of trying to ultimately dig through the entirety of the dump.
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of figured they had a system like that of dumping garbage. You don't really think about these things. First off, when you think of landfills, you just think, yeah, just dump it randomly. But the fact that they've methodically separated it out into piles on these days, these months, these years, do you think they do that for the purposes of this potentially happening?
That's a good question. I mean, it definitely is helpful to the investigation. And it's something that in the past, like people have thrown stuff into dumps to try to get rid of evidence, for example. But is it strictly because of the police? I think there's other reasons for it as well. But it's definitely a big one for police, I would say, but I'm not 100% sure.
I wonder if also they take into account, like, I don't know, future excavations of these landfills, say thousands of years in the future, for people wanting to know what our civilization was like.
If they're like planning ahead to almost like leave behind a man-made fossil, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. Like we can dig through layers of like rocks, like sands that pile up over time, and we find fossils in there and we discover things about the past. I wonder if that's what they have in mind about like dumping these things in this specific way. It's like, oh, in this year, this is what the civilization was like.
That's quite the thought. Like, I don't know how to follow that up.
So interestingly enough, a piece of information that wouldn't be made public for months was that a second landfill was identified as a potential site of interest. The Prairie Green landfill, just north of Winnipeg. In June, garbage dumping was ordered to stop at the Prairie Green landfill as more remains were believed to be there. We will talk more about this later. Moving back in time a little bit, on May 24th, 2022, the Winnipeg Police Missing Person Unit sent out an alert asking for help for finding Morgan Harris. She was last seen in Winnipeg on May 1st. However, by June 20th, 2022, police believed that Morgan Harris as well as Mercedes Myron, who were both members of the Long Plain First Nation, were likely in the Prairie Green landfill, but did not make this information public. By September 26, 2022, Mercedes Myron's family finally reported her missing. On December 1st, 2022, police announced that Skibicki was being charged with 3 additional counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, and Buffalo Woman. Besides this, police give very little information about any leads they are pursuing about the 3 women who have yet to be found. All they indicated was that they had sufficient and robust evidence showing that these women were killed by Jeremy Skibicki. For more insight on this, I asked Sergeant Jeff to discuss this further. How can someone be arrested and charged for 4 murders, but only 1 set of remains were recovered at the time?
That's an interesting question. So it's that habeas corpus, I think, is the old Latin term for it, which is absence of a body. If you have a missing person, and throughout the course of the investigation, and my understanding is this individual confessed to the other murders. So you have somebody who has been arrested for murder, which you can prove with physical evidence, and in this case, and they're going to lay the charge. It is reasonable if this person is confessing of their own free will that they have committed other homicides, and he describes the other homicides and who the person was, to match that up to a missing person. And they look at that. You have to do a lot of investigation to make sure you're not, just checking one off and saying, well, here's a missing person, we'll pin this one on him. That's not the case. They have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the one he confessed to is this person. Okay, and so it's going to take quite a bit of investigation, interviews, descriptions, probably when and where. They might find out where the person was last seen, other aspects of their personality, their method of dress, tattoos, jewelry, anything that's an identifying feature for that person. They'll have to, some way, make it fairly definitive that what he confessed to is that particular person, especially in the absence of physical evidence, DNA, part of the body itself, or whatever it happens to be.
From what I could find through interviews and various articles, there was a treasure trove of evidence such as video surveillance showing Skibicki and the victims together on the days where they were believed to go missing, surveillance footage of Skibicki pulling a garbage bin and depositing black garbage bags into a dumpster multiple times, DNA, and personal items of the victims found at his residence, such as clothing that the women were seen wearing in some of the surveillance videos. I've got footage here that we're going to watch. I will be posting these clips in the show notes for the listeners to view.
Was this guy just so cocky that he wasn't going to get caught? Or what? He was very sloppy. Or did he want to get caught? Like, what's the deal?
You'll see in the interviews, but he basically just says that I was getting sloppy. Like, I was overconfident that I wasn't going to get caught, which is usually the downfall of most of these kinds of people. So what do you guys make of that footage?
So watching the footage of Skibicki rolling these garbage bins to the dumpster, looks like Groundhog Day. It's like the exact same footage 4 times.
Yeah, and the fact that they have multiple clips showing him doing the exact same thing, and he's not exactly like an unrecognizable person. He's very unique in that he's got a bald head, he's got a beard, he's larger in stature, he has a very distinct walk, like stuff like that where it's like, okay, it's very clearly him. And you can see him in other pieces of footage inside of the homeless shelters as well. And he's with the victims. So it's like, okay, you have all the evidence you could possibly need on this guy.
And he does it so casually.
Yeah.
Like,
Was he homeless?
No, he had a residence, but
apartment.
he would prey on his victims by going to these homeless shelters and finding them, which we'll get into a little bit more later about kind of why he chose these people, but it basically has everything to do with that.
Was he pretending to be homeless? Like, why would the shelter workers let him in there? I assume he was grabbing food and stuff. Would they let him do that?
well, and again, he's a sweet talker, right? Like, he just, I don't know, he could like convince his way in.
On December 6, 2022, this is where the case takes a turn. Police announced that they believe the remains of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron are in the Prairie Green landfill, but state that it would not be feasible to search for them. This statement was made after Morgan Harris's daughters called police and begged them to do whatever it took to recover their mother's remains. This obviously outraged the community, and despite this, Premier Heather Stephenson of Winnipeg paused operations at the Prairie Green landfill on December 8, 2022. On December 9, 2022, police officials announced that they were trying to find a way to search for the remains of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron, but have yet to determine the best way to do that. They would have to set up a feasibility study to determine if the operation could be performed. The federal government confirmed that they would be funding the cost of this study. It would be about $500,000. And Premier Stephenson pledged her support of the study. People were still outraged by the political decisions being made and protested at Brady Road landfill and demanded more searching to be conducted since Rebecca Contois' remains were found there. Who's to say there aren't more remains in the landfill? On January 17, 2023, an announcement was made stating that the feasibility study can be expected to be completed by March 31st. There would be no public announcement about the study until May 12th, 2023, where it was noted that a search effort of this magnitude could take up to 3 years and cost $184 million. On July 5th, 2023, the provincial government announced that they will not be supporting nor funding the search for Mercedes Myron or Morgan Harris, citing that they were concerned about searchers' health and safety. Which is interesting because before there were dollar signs involved, the Premier was all for supporting the feasibility study. Here's more from Sergeant Jeff talking about whether the police are involved in this decision-making process. Police initially commented and said the garbage dump search would not be feasible for the second dump. Do the police have any power to make that decision, or is this strictly made by the provincial government?
That's a real gray area. The police can go and get a search warrant for that, which they'll have to do. But it's going to come down to resources. That's something that every aspect of law enforcement is always dealing with, or lack thereof. It's also going to come down to, is there a reasonable expectation that evidence can be found there? If it's a really wide range of time, for example, it's sometime over the past 1 month block. As you've done your research, you've seen that they know, and they kind of map out where the garbage is going to be dumped in the landfills. But you may be talking a huge area. And is it really definitive where they can go and search for it? That's going to be a real challenge. And especially after the fact, if it's a lengthy period of time, 6 months or whatever, how many layers of trash are on there? Who's going to pay for that? I hate to say it come down to dollars and cents, but if it's 6 months ago and they have to stop and excavate, that could be in the millions of dollars. In the end, you're going to have to figure out who has to pay for that. And it may not be within the police budget. Actually, I can almost guarantee it's not in the police budget. They're going to have to get money from probably the provincial government, maybe the federal government. Their budget is set. They can't just arbitrarily say, we're going to spend another $2 million on this search. There's just no money there. They have to get that approved. And if it's not in the police budget, it's going to have to come from somewhere else. And I know that in this case, there was quite a bit of political discussion, is the best way to put that, I guess. And the one political party was not going to be involved at all. And it just boggles my mind that everybody wouldn't have been on board with that initially. How anybody could be pushing back to that happen. This is a tragedy. A travesty is even more than appropriate. And that why you wouldn't do everything you could to try to find the women that are missing. We're talking about an underserviced area. It's a group of people, identified people, who are very, very vulnerable, that don't have the protections that they should have had. And this has happened, and it's an absolute travesty. We need to do whatever we can in our powers to rectify this. Not just to find those that are missing and are murdered, but to bring those responsible to justice and to ensure, going forward, that this never happens again. Ever. And then look at other groups. Is there an opportunity for this to happen to somebody else in a different group or in another way? Put an end to that too. So why somebody would push back against that? Like that's, to me, that's very perplexing.
This refusal of support by the provincial government outraged the community even more, and the next day they blocked the road leading to Brady Road landfill, demanding the government change their minds and search the Prairie Green landfill. Unfortunately, on July 14th, a judge ordered protesters to disband from the Brady Road landfill, and 4 days later, city workers tore down the blockade that had been set up. Protesting continued as family members and people close to the victims did everything in their power to be heard by the government. In my personal opinion, this next part is appalling, to say the least. The Winnipeg provincial election was on the horizon, and the Progressive Conservative Party's ad campaign, who Premier Heather Stephenson was the candidate for, boasted that they would stand firm in their refusal to search Prairie Green landfill if re-elected. I'll be posting the ad campaign in the show notes. To accompany this, there were also radio and television ads promoting the same message. On October 3rd, 2023, the PC, Progressive Conservative Party were defeated at the election polls, and NDP leader Wab Kinew was elected and vowed to do everything in his power to ensure a search of the Prairie Green landfill was done. One day after Kinew was elected, the federal government committed $740,000 to further review a search of the landfill. By January 26, 2024, the new study found the cost would be closer to $90 million instead of the originally estimated $184 million. Finally, on March 22, 2024, both the federal and provincial governments committed $20 million each for the search of the Prairie Green landfill for the remains of Mercedes Myron and Morgan Harris. Almost 2 years of waiting, the families finally had a breakthrough. During that time, $700,000 from the provincial government went to the victims' families to support them during Skibicki's trial and for their mental well-being. Skibicki's trial was set to begin May 8, 2024. Initially, at the preliminary hearing held back in November 6 of 2023, Skibicki pled not guilty, and his lawyers requested his trial to be before a judge alone and not a jury. This request was denied as it must be approved by the Crown. For those of you who don't know, the Crown is the prosecution. In a strange turn of events, on May 6, 2024, 2 days before the trial was set to begin, Skibicki admitted he was guilty of all 4 murders, but asked to be found not criminally responsible due to a mental illness he had. The motion to have the trial before a judge only and not a jury was granted, as the Crown said that it no longer had to prove Skibicki committed the murders. On May 8th, the trial began, where Skibicki, in a very flat manner, described to the court the last minutes of each woman's life before he killed them. All of the women were killed in a very short amount of time, spanning from March of 2022 to May of 2022. Buffalo Woman was killed by Skibicki first around March 15th, 2022, followed by Morgan Harris on May 1st and Mercedes Myron on May 4th. Rebecca Contois was the final victim believed to be killed on May 14th or 15th. Skibicki deliberately targeted Indigenous women at homeless shelters who were vulnerable and brought them back to his apartment, where he drowned them in his bathtub or strangled them before disposing of their bodies in garbage bins. Sometimes he left them in the bathtub for hours and masked the smell with Pine Sol cleaner. Police told the court that they searched Skibicki's residence and found women's clothing and underwear belonging to the victims, as determined by surveillance video and DNA. Some clothing items were spattered with blood. The police played the interview for the court where Skibicki said the following, quote, "I guess I got sloppy." The detective then asked him, "Do you think you would have stopped the killing?" And Skibicki replied, "No, I wanted to." Some of the facts Skibicki tried recalling were fuzzy, as he claimed to have been high on drugs most of the time. He knew 3 of the victims' names, but claimed he felt bad because he didn't know who one woman was, who the community had named Buffalo Woman. The only piece of evidence linked to Buffalo Woman was a black and white Baby Fat brand jacket. He then proceeded to tell people that he was motivated by hate and disgust. He then rambled on about white supremacy and made anti-Semitic comments. He also included that he felt this was something God wanted him to do. All of this may have been in an effort to try and convince the court that he was not criminally responsible and was insane. All the while, he explained everything in an extremely cold manner with no emotion. Ultimately, Skibicki's team was not able to succeed in their defense. On July 11, 2024, Skibicki was found guilty on all 4 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 4 life terms of imprisonment to be served concurrently with no possibility of parole for 25 years. This is the max sentence in Canada. He will be 60 years old when that happens. The families of the victims got their justice that they deserved. The victims were Indigenous women, which immediately raised concerns about a much larger issue. Indigenous women in Canada have historically been at a greater risk of violence and neglect, which has been exponentially increased by factors such as poverty, drug addiction, and many others. For years, Indigenous communities have called attention to the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, also known as MMIWG, but typically, nothing has been done by both the public and the government. You've heard this before in some of our other cases, like the Robert Pickton episode, for example. Each of the victims left behind grieving families who have since called for justice and greater attention to be given to the issue of violence against Indigenous people. The murder of these women also sparked conversations about the need for better policing, social services, and resources dedicated to protecting vulnerable populations in not only Winnipeg, but all across Canada. Many advocates for Indigenous rights have also called for more action from the government to address the root causes of violence and to prevent future tragedies. This case wasn't over yet. There was still a lot of work for police to do and a promise Premier Kinyu made that he had to keep. In December of 2024, search teams launched their excavation of the Prairie Green landfill to find the missing remains. The search started after the searching crews were able to pinpoint a specific area of the landfill where the remains were most likely to be. This was all based on date ranges and times of various pickups. The search went on for months, where trucks took excavated landfill to a search facility built on site to try and recover the remains. Finally, on February 26, 2025, 2 sets of remains were recovered from the landfill. And on March 7th, 1 set of the remains were identified as belonging to Morgan Harris. The other set was identified on Monday, March 17th, as belonging to Mercedes Myron. Premier Kinyu had this to say about the discovery, quote, "Many Canadians always understood that this was the right thing to do, to search the landfill. But now we can also say with confidence that this was also the realistic and reasonable thing to do. Mercedes Myron and Morgan Harris are coming home." The most recent news on this case occurred on March 26, 2025, where police identified who Buffalo Woman was. 31-year-old Ashley Shingoose, a woman missing from the St. Teresa Point First Nation. She was last seen in downtown Winnipeg in March of 2022. At the time of recording this episode, which is April 18th, 2025, her remains have not yet been found, but based on the investigation, police believe that her remains are back in the Brady Road landfill. Premier Kinyu promised the family of Ashley Shingoose at a news conference that there will be a search conducted for her remains. Skibicki's senseless murders of these 4 women was a tragedy that shook the city to its core and raised important questions about the justice system, inequality, and the vulnerability of marginalized communities. While Skibicki's conviction brought some closure to the families of the victims, it also highlighted the ongoing struggles faced by Indigenous communities in Canada. As the city of Winnipeg and the rest of Canada process the events of 2022, it is clear that there is a lot of work that still has to be done to ensure that the tragedies do not happen again in the future. People's lives should never be valued less than money. Life is so much more important than that. I will end with a quote from Morgan Harris's daughter, who spoke out about the provincial government refusing to search for her mother's remains. Quote, "They keep saying it comes down to feasibility, but it doesn't come down to feasibility when it's about human beings and bringing these people home." All right, so what'd you guys think of the case?
Found this one quite interesting just because it was current, because we've always talked about ones that are in the past, but I'm just really glad that he was found, and that, because like he said, he would have just kept killing, right? So I'm really glad he was found, and that, but I'm hoping that they put in some better measures in the future to help with these investigations.
Like, I still don't understand how people could think it was a good idea to like push and advocate and say, we're not going to do anything about this and be excited about it. So to just your average person watching that just comes across as you don't care about these people whatsoever, and money matters more in your pocket than actually helping people. So actions speak louder than words is a phrase we've all heard before. And the actions here showed just the same thing that these people have been experiencing for years and years and years. And that's neglect, violence, and just nobody caring about them whatsoever, which is absolutely saddening to hear. But like you said, something has to be done.
Well, and just to highlight and to commend the families on how strong they kept, and they kept fighting, and 2 years later, then it finally happened, right? So just never giving up.
I agree with Brando's points. And an interesting thing you mentioned, you said he was going to keep killing. So maybe that's kind of gives the police an incentive to look out for these people, these marginalized communities. Maybe, who knows, put some security cameras in these areas or get a police presence out there. Because that was a threat. I was going to keep killing.
And if you remember from the interview that I played earlier, he said the justice system is a joke. And he was trying to see how far he could go before something was actually done. But he also wanted there to be a more severe punishment. So part of him is just like, I can do whatever I want and nothing's going to happen because this is all a joke. So maybe because of that too, different measures will be taken now to make sure something like this doesn't happen again, and more money will be allocated to helping these people.
Yeah, sadly, he kind of proved his own point.
Yeah.
That he could get away with so much.
Yeah.
Well, it just makes you think, like, what did he do before these killings, right? That he did get away with and that they don't know about.
Yeah, in the one interview, they said that there were 16 different pieces of DNA, distinct DNA evidence found in his apartment. So that's 12 people that haven't been identified. He only claimed to kill 4 total, and other women were brought to his apartment that he did stuff with. I don't know to what extent that might be. It's probably as bad as we think it is, but I don't know if he killed them or not, or let them go, because he talked about in the trial about how he brought these people back and abused them or attacked them or gave them drugs in some way and then let them go afterwards. It is time for trivia. All right, so we're currently sitting at 2 points for Brando and 1 for Pat. We'll see if we can bring this to a tie, or you can take away the lead, Brando.
Tie.
I think Brando clean sweeped me last time, so I need to get my act together.
Yeah, until the next UFO one.
All right, question number 1. How many people are reported missing each year in Canada? Is it A, 10,000 to 12,000? B, 70,000 to 80,000? C, 150,000 to 160,000? Or D, 200,000 to 210,000?
These are all ridiculous numbers. Before you started naming these off, I was thinking like, oh, maybe 1,000. But I'm just going to wing it and say B.
Well, I knew it wasn't going to be a small number, so I'm going to go C.
The correct answer is B. In any given year, between 70,000 and 80,000 people are reported missing to police in Canada.
That's scary.
Question number 2. What percentage of missing person cases are solved in Canada within 30 days? Is it A, 15%, B, 50%, C, 85%, or D, 95%?
I'm going B.
I'm going to say D. I think most cases are run-of-the-mill, just ran away from home.
You are correct, Pat. The answer is D, 95%. A high percentage of missing person cases are resolved relatively quickly. A study by the RCMP, that's the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, found that 70% of resolved missing person cases were resolved in 3 days of being reported, and 95% were resolved within 30 days. However, about 500 missing persons cases remain unsolved every year. All right, question number 3. Which province has the longest unsolved missing person case in Canada? Is it A, Ontario, B, Manitoba, C, Saskatchewan, or D, British Columbia?
I'll say B, Manitoba.
Ontario.
The correct answer is A, Ontario. The North Bay Police Service has the longest unsolved missing person case in Canada, dating back to June 12, 1966, when 27-year-old Philippe Garin went missing and has still not been found.
Future episode?
Maybe. All right, so that's going to end the case for the night. If you have any ideas or want your story featured on the show, please email us at strangeandundecided@gmail.com. For next week, for those of you who are interested, we'll be covering the case of Terry Driver, as per Brando's suggestion. So thank you for that. As always, thanks for listening.
And
good night.